the PJM.
Sorry, I just hit the record button.
Oh, okay.
Um, okay, so there is people are seeing the demand for more power then as this is coming on board. So are you getting busier with your work then?
Yeah, we're getting certainly this year it's been pretty busy, a lot of deal flow coming in. Last year we were caught in between a lot of, I'd say, changes at the federal policy level that disrupted the market pretty significantly with the changes to tax credits. So that put a lot of things on hold just because there was a lot of question marks for investment. And a lot of that time was more kind of reading the tea leaves and figuring out what the policy direction was going to go. We had a lot of kind of fits and starts on some projects where people were trying to get in before deadlines and kind of at this.
Freezing New Jersey. Something up here. Sorry. Okay, Alex, can you mute?
I'm trying to.
I got you. Okay. All right, go ahead, Nathan.
So it was kind of a mixed bag last year, but this year, I mean, and plus there was a lot of this kind of what's going to be going on with data centers. So you saw the big tech companies, and they immediately made this huge splash on the market to try to figure this out and how to build at scale, um, and really get their knowledge up on the energy industry in a way that they hadn't been in the past. Um, and then they just made this huge leap into it because previously they had kind of been doing this sustainability goals of what we would call virtual power purchase agreements. They really cared about the renewables and getting the credit for environmental attributes and things like that and helping to finance and get those built. Then they realized they need the power in massive quantities for data centers. And so now everything in anything and everything is on the table. That's why you hear, I'm sure, in the press, nuclear sites getting repowered that may have been retired already. How do we build new nuclear now? Which was never going to be a conversation 5 years ago, and now it's how do we do this as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So it's a total game changer in the energy space where now it's just how do we get as many electrons as possible onto the grid. Who's going to get those electrons? Is it going to be the tech companies? What are the utilities going to do? What does that mean for the everyday, residential customer like you and I and our electric bills? These are just massive topics that are rippling across the industry.
Okay. So we've got a bunch of other people joining us. So your background is you're a CPA and you work with the power industry to negotiate leases. Is that exact? Do I have that right?
No, so I'm an attorney. So
Oh, you're an attorney. Okay.
I am an energy attorney. I actually focus my practice mostly on the commercial and regulatory aspects of the power sector. So I do a lot of what's called offtake contracts, which is usually the sale of power itself. That may be through utilities, it may be through developers that are building power plants, or it may be by buyers, such as those big tech companies or just companies that are looking to meet sustainability goals that are buying power on their own. Um, I also do a lot of state regulatory work, which is a very heavily regulated industry. There's a lot of agencies involved with utility rate making, things like that, and also the development and construction of power plants themselves. So I handle most of those aspects of project development, um, and certainly dabble in project financing and kind of those sides too.
Okay. So you're about as well-rounded into this topic as we could hope to find. So that's awesome. Thanks, Cody.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we mentioned earlier the conversation started. We're investors. We're kind of pumping money into, some of us are trying to 1031 out of some investment properties and put it into other things. The thought process was all the demand for electricity may be the new asset, right? As the compute power and the electricity is really going to be the asset in the new AI world. So can we 1031 into take some of our investment portfolio and put it into, I'm using the 1 megawatt example of that 5 to 10 acre solar garden. Because that's right around somewhere between a million, million five, whatever, depending on land cost. Is that possible to 1031 into that? And if so, what are the realistic costs and what are the realistic paybacks?
Okay, so I am not a tax attorney, so
Okay,
that's
that's fine.
definitely
Yeah.
not in my sphere.
Fair
reasonably
enough.
fairly. I very quickly hand that off to the people who are our tax attorneys when we get into those types of questions.
That's an easy question to get
Yeah,
answered, so don't worry about that one.
yeah. Um, and I was kind of looking, look, where you guys are at in this kind of thought process. I mean, I look at it from a developer's perspective of where am I going to site my project? What are the economics of my project going to be? Um, and generally, there's going to be really two major components that you're looking at in terms of your site and the project economics itself. And look, your supply chain and all of that, that's what it is. That's going to be what you have access to in procuring your materials. Usually you're going to be doing that through your EPC contractor. If you got one of those.
No.
Whether you are doing it yourself versus third party development is a pretty big preliminary question. Doing it yourself is a heavy lift because the electric industry is very unique. The supply chain for the industry is very unique. Um, how you work in the electric markets is very unique. So if you don't have that expertise, you're going to be paying somebody else pretty
Hmm.
significantly for it. Um, and so really there's kind of those early planning considerations of how much you can do on your own versus how much you're going to have to pay somebody else. And whether that's an EPC contractor, whether that's a market participant that's actually going to be, say, bidding that project into a wholesale market, whether you're going to have a broker going to manage offtake of that power and to get you a contract with the local utility or somebody else that can buy it for themselves, or to go out and find you a customer where you might be building it on their site. Now, it sounds like here you're talking about you guys may have some land yourselves, and I think Cody mentioned Wisconsin or Minnesota,
Yeah.
those areas.
Minnesota.
Yeah, so how you're able to sell that power depends very heavily on where that site is and the local utility where that site is located. So that both of those states are what's called the MISO Regional Transmission Organization area. So that's the Midwest Intercontinental System Operator. Um, that is the manager of essentially the entire power wholesale market of that region, and that spans a number of states. Um, and that's kind of the default power market. So if you were able to just sell that power into a market, it would be the MISO market. You would probably need at 1 megawatt or less to go through a third party aggregator to do that because that's a very small system for like a wholesale power um, supplier. Usually we're talking about, at scale of 20 megawatts plus. So you're probably looking at least at going with an aggregator if you're looking at any type of wholesale market transaction there.
Okay.
More
So,
often at
so the third party aggregator just pools a bunch of different power together to negotiate bigger contracts. Am I understanding that right? Okay.
and
I
in
just dropped. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
You guys still hear me? Yeah. Um, so whether you're able to find a customer because that's like a warehouse that's adjacent to your site, somewhere that you can run a wire to, and assuming you don't have to get easements over like third party lands, you can directly connect to them and do what's called a behind the meter arrangement. And in that case, you kind of bypass the utility. So that way you're able to sell it directly to somebody else who can use it. Um, and then you've got what's called net metering. And you may have heard of that for like residential homes where there may be a program through the local utility that allows you for every kilowatt that you generate from your solar project, you can use that to offset your retail bill from the utility. This is a big issue with solar because solar only really produces peak hours 4 to 5 hours a day. So if you've got, you know, say you have an egg an egg farm and they're running like heat lamps or something
Hmm.
24/7, right? Well, that solar is only good for 4 hours while it's running. So that's the classic example of if you sized a solar facility to meet an egg farm where you have 24/7 power needs or a data center, you know, um, that net metering is key to get the full economic value of that solar. Otherwise, you can only use a portion of that during 4 hours. The rest is likely going to go to the grid um, at much lower rates because you're not getting an offsetting retail rate. And some utilities have programs where they will buy it from you, but those prices where the utility is going to buy it from you, if it's not credited against your retail rate, is a fraction of a retail rate. Like the price that we pay for power as residential customers, you know, we might, I mean, I pay like 14 cents a
I
kilowatt
was gonna
hour here
say
in New
20
Jersey.
cents is what I'm paying.
If you're paying 20 cents per kilowatt hour, the
Yeah.
wholesale market price, it's probably no more than five.
Okay.
So that's the difference between wholesale rates and retail rates. Most of the rates that you pay in your electric bill is actually for the utility and their distribution system and transmission costs. So
Okay.
the generation component itself is not that high. It's everything else that they do to provide you service that
That
really
makes sense.
takes up the lion's share of your utility bill. Um, and so that all factors into the economics of your project. It really depends on where you're located, who your local utility is, how you're even able to sell it in that region. Um, the real physical component of your site is how do you interconnect it, which is literally how do you plug it into the wires of the grid. Um, and you're not going to build your own transmission wires yourself because that's basically like building a pipeline, right? You're just
Yeah.
never going to do that. That's a massive, hundreds of millions of dollar project with God knows how many easements. Um, what you are going to do is called a tie line, which is just basically a size line that's purpose built for your project to plug it into the bigger lines of either of the utility. And the utility has its distribution system lines, which are just kind of like those roadside lines. They're usually smaller, low voltage lines, or the really high voltage transmission lines. Those are kind of the highways, byways system of the electric grid.
Yeah.
For 1 megawatt system, I mean, you're probably just plugging into the distribution line. Um, but the question is how much capacity is on that distribution line because you have to apply it to the utility to actually get interconnection. If you're going to require an upgrade of that line because it doesn't have the capacity to handle your system, then you have to pay for those upgrades, and the utility has to tell you how much that's going to cost, and you have to pay for it. So that's another big component, and that's one of the quickest ways to kill a project
Yep.
because you'll get an interconnection cost from a utility for $1 million, and suddenly your cost is doubled of your project if
Yep.
that's not the right line. So there's developers will usually have in-house electrical engineers that actually run studies on the grid to figure out where they can plug into for lower cost. And that's one of the biggest economic factors that goes into project siting.
Okay. How do you get one of these studies done? Is that expensive?
I mean, you can hire them. So there's
Okay.
definitely engineers out there that you can find that can do transmission studies to find interconnection capacity.
Okay. So
Um,
we're dealing with location, location, location.
Location, yeah. And look, I would compare this in some ways to if you were speculating on like oil and gas land, right? I mean, you're looking not only for where you have the reserves, right? Because here you still need to find a site that's suitable for solar. It needs to be relatively flat, it needs to have good access to sun. You can't have tall buildings or a forest right next to you. Um, you also would need to find, in the case of oil, access to the pipelines. Really, like how's a oil developer going to come in and extract that resource? Are they going to build a giant pipeline to get to your site? Or are they going to do it close by to somewhere where there's already one existing?
Hmm.
Most likely, it's going to be much more valuable if you're closer to one that already exists. Um, Similar concept with electricity is just the major difference is you're dealing with regulated electric utilities because they own all of the wires. So you have to work within them and you have to work within their regulatory system of how you can sell power.
Okay. So the first step would be location on what you can do there, and then you have to find a third party to negotiate the rates with the power company. Am I oversimplifying this right now?
If that's even an option. So
Okay.
that's assuming that the power company and there's another layer to this, especially in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Those are two states where there's large swaths of territory that are by rural cooperatives.
Hmm.
They're not traditional utilities and municipal electric utilities. Those are two categories that are much more difficult typically to work with than your your franchise monopoly utility. And the
Okay.
reason why is because they're typically not subject to the same state regulatory scheme. They typically have more of a self-governance regime where they get to decide their own um, regulatory kind of framework. They get to decide, you know, do they want to have net metering or anything like that? Do they want to have a system where they're going to buy power from independent producers? And they're not usually subject to state regulatory agencies with jurisdiction over them. So they're kind of the Wild West when it comes to this stuff, and you just have to deal with whatever they're willing to work with you on.
Okay.
Sometimes they want the power, so sometimes they can be very, very friendly towards that. But um, if they say no, you're in a much more difficult spot.
Okay.
So that's another thing just to keep on mind in terms of where you're looking at
It
um,
overlaps in
land here.
everything else in Minnesota. It's not the easiest state to do business in, so that's not a shock. Um,
Well, coming from somebody in New Jersey, I know where you're coming from. Talk about hard to do business. Yeah.
okay, so can let's just say you can line all this up. You find the location, you can negotiate the contract through a third party. You're still dealing with that 1 megawatt, which is I don't know, 5 to 10 acres maybe, and you build it out. What are you selling the electricity back for? Generally,
Yeah.
is there a range?
So that's always the key question of how do you get the revenue on the project?
Hmm.
And that's where it depends on how you're structuring your offtake. Another thing that will most likely get you higher rates and has been very successful, but it's still fairly early stage. I did do a quick search and saw that both Wisconsin and Minnesota have these. It's called community solar programs.
Yes. Yep.
So, community solar programs are likely a very good fit for this type of a project. Um, what it is it basically allows what's called virtual net metering. And you're not just serving one customer. Usually with community solar, you will you're generally going to partner with a developer for community solar. It's not something you'd want to take on your own. And
Okay.
the reason for that is how you market this project. Um, but a developer will build the community solar project and they will essentially go out and market to subscribers. Usually these states have low income minority participation that they require as a certain percentage of the offtake of it. But basically they go and they market it to people that rent apartments that can't build solar on the rooftop. And it allows them to subscribe to get a small slice of the project, and they get the benefit of that project off their utility bills. And they basically get it at a discount, and you sell it to them based on a discount off of their retail electric rates. Um, I'm not sure that that's exactly how it works in Wisconsin and Minnesota. I'm basing it off the other states that I'm more familiar with on these programs. But for instance, in New Jersey, um, they'll typically offer a discount of anywhere from 20 to 40% off the utility bill. And that's what the community solar project developer does. The subscriber signs up. They're guaranteed that discount off their utility bill for as long as they stay subscribed to the project. Um, and the community solar developer gets the retail rate minus that 20% discount. And again, that's significantly higher than what you would get in the wholesale market generally, because retail rates are multiples higher than the wholesale rate typically. Um, and those have done well. So that's a good way to get a project financed. It's a good way to get guaranteed offtake, um, and get those projects built with a nice return. And so those projects have been very successful in these states. So in terms of planning it from your guys' perspective, I mean, you're really looking in this case to probably be negotiating a lease with a community solar developer,
Okay.
because these are companies that do this, in these markets, in these states. They know the regulatory requirements. There's typically some type of RFP process with the state that they have to apply for. They know the ins and outs of that. They work with third party brokers who go out and market to subscribers and sign them up to projects. They have financing sources to get these projects financed. And they're basically just going to work with the landowner and giving you a lease. That's typically how that works.
Okay. Do you know, I mean, there's got to be economics to a lease then. Does a lease make sense to do a ground lease for these developments?
Typically, yeah. I mean, look, it's an extra source of revenue off the land itself. I mean, I've always viewed solar on kind of these greenfield projects to be a pretty good investment because it preserves the land. Um, One thing that we have a big problem with in New Jersey is there's not a lot of land. And
Hmm.
so we constantly have this debate over, are we going to open up more land for things of development? Are we going to put up more apartments? Are we going to make space for energy projects? And we always get all the pushback from the environmentalists that say, no, you should keep it all greenfield. And all the farms that we've subsidized for 20 years, we shouldn't develop those either because we subsidized them for farming for 20 years.
Yeah.
Um, my view has always been, look, I understand all of that. Yes, we want to keep beautiful areas, but look, the benefit of solar is once you put solar on there, it preserves the land for 15 years because nothing else is getting built up on that land for 15 years while you've got solar on it. So that's kind of the pro and con of it. Um, but that does kind of bring up another point that you need to be mindful of in this endeavor is that one thing that has very much become a recent trend is public opposition to solar projects. And that was not the case 5 or 6 years ago, but as energy has become incredibly politically charged, um, you're seeing a lot of NIMBYism against renewable energy projects. And that includes solar, that includes, so you got to be mindful of who your neighbors are going to be because
Hmm.
they're the ones that you're going to be fighting in front of a zoning and planning board.
Okay. So if how small can you go with this and actually find someone to lease it? So if I bought like a storage lockers, the storage site, and had a couple extra acres, could I do 2 acres of solar and still find a viable tenant to lease that for solar, or is that too small?
Potentially. I'm not familiar enough with those particular markets and what the size limitations on their program are. Usually, community solar project, well, if they allow for bigger projects, they're always going to go for bigger size because they get economies of scale.
Hmm.
So developers can kind of run the gamut, and they usually have their sweet spot of the size that they like to build. New Jersey, we have a 5 megawatt limit on community solar projects, so there's plenty of them that are a megawatt or less. Um, they're also usually much more rooftop based.
Okay.
So you're usually putting them on warehouses when you can, and occasionally you'll get like a brownfield or something else. But we're a very rooftop focused solar market. Minnesota, Wisconsin may be a very different story. New
No, we
York, for
have a
instance,
limit on it too. I just don't remember what it
okay,
is. Yep.
yeah, so that's a very important consideration because if it's a lower limit, then they're probably going to be looking for smaller sizes, and that's going to be much more accommodative in their financing and their economic modeling. Um, New York, it's like 10 to 20 megawatts. So they're usually going for 10 to 20 megawatts because they want to get the bigger projects because
How
they can
much
offer a
land does
better
it take
discount.
to do 10 to 20 megawatts?
Yeah, so that's same 5 to 8 acres per megawatt. So yeah, that's anywhere from 50 to 80 for 10 megawatts and 100 to 160 for 20. So they get some big land. I mean, I've been working on a battery project in New York, and that's an 80-acre site, but batteries you need far less space. So that's we're talking a 500 megawatt project for that. So
Okay. Um, what are they paying for land out there? Are they 10,000 an acre for something like that? Do you know?
that I don't know. That I don't know offhand. I mean, that depends so much on the area of the state because especially a market like New York, the closer you get to the metropolitan areas and how that land is zoned, you can have huge discrepancies in terms of what land goes for.
Hmm. Yeah, egg land seems to run that around here. So that's kind of why I pulled that number out of thin air. Now, is there any other, because you're in all sectors of energy, is there anything else we should be thinking of to kind of prepare for the shift that kind of happens with needing more power? Am I pigeonholing the conversation on just thinking solar?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at other emerging tech. I would think about things like batteries. I would think about things like fuel cells. Fuel cells are actually starting to perk up quite a bit after they've kind of had a slow and steady growth over the last 5 to 10 years. But like I just did a project on a fuel cell on site, a few months ago. But yeah, there's a lot of other technologies out there that are, you can do a lot more with a lot less land. If you're just looking to utilize larger pieces of land, then yeah, I'd say solar is kind of a good way to use it. Um, it's just that, a lot of the places where you'd get land for a project like solar is going to be where it's already pretty competitive. Like the solar market is a very competitive market, is one thing that I would very much point out. Um, I mean, I've seen a lot of kind of smaller developers that may have branched off from bigger ones, and they have a hard time getting a foothold because it's a very competitive space.
Okay. So how do fuel cells work? I don't understand what fuel cells are. How is that different than like a battery?
Yeah, so a fuel cell is kind of like a generator, but it's chemical based. It's a chemical reaction. So they take natural gas, and through a chemical reaction, they convert that natural gas to electricity, and it's a much more efficient production method than say combustion, because there's not the same heat loss involved. Um, but they can run 24/7, and so you get a full capacity energy resource. They take very little land and they use potentially very cheap natural gas. So those are kind of an intriguing technology right now. They're still more expensive, but you can make up for that based on the capacity factor that they have and depending on what your natural gas input price is. Um,
What kind of investment would we be talking about to do a fuel cell
so for a
power
fuel
generation?
cell, if you're talking about 1 megawatt, that's going to be more like 5 to 8 million bucks, and
Okay,
you have to go through somebody else to do all of that. So you're
sure.
not going to be building that yourself.
Then what's the benefit if you're generating the same power? Is there a lifespan difference?
Lifespan's about the same. It's more that you get much more density of energy production than you do for solar. So they produce a lot more power. It's a baseload power, which means you can get what's a much better what's called capacity revenues in the wholesale market because there's been a lot of reforms lately that have actually diluted the value of solar in wholesale markets because it only runs for a few hours a day. So they get
Yeah.
lower credit in the markets for that. Um, so, it's worth looking into kind of some other generating technologies that can kind of harness those other positive attributes and, may give you more bang for your buck on land, depending on how much capital you have at your disposal and how you're kind of looking at the space.
Okay. We've got a few questions in the chat. Before we jump into these other questions, just kind of wanted to explore that. If it sounds like we have to go much larger scale to generate any sort of revenue. When I was looking at doing the 1 megawatt of solar, I was thinking I could get like a 7% cap rate on that after expenses. And I had to recalculate on sun loss in Minnesota, down to 30% in the winter. So the the fuel cells, you kind of blew my mind. I was thinking this was going to be more of it would actually work, but it sounds like it's pretty complicated to pull off these power plants with solar.
It's not for the faint of heart.
Okay.
The power industry, I mean, it's very competitive, and there's a lot of people that have been doing this for their entire careers that, you know, there's a steep learning curve.
Okay.
Um, that's not to say it can't be done. It's just you're probably going to need to partner up with some expert consultants to really get your feet wet with it because it's not something that you can easily jump into.
Okay. And what are rates going to do as the power demand goes up? Are we going to see power rates potentially double if we don't solve this capacity
Oh,
issue?
easily. So in PJM, which is the largest electric RTO market, and it spans everywhere from New Jersey out to Ohio down to DC, um, we have what's called a forward capacity market. And what it does is it projects out for supply and demand 3 years out. And based on all of the data center interconnection requests that they've gotten in the last 2 years, the capacity market rates have gone up tenfold. And so we have already seen 20% increases to all of our electric bills in New Jersey just based on, and capacity market is usually a very small slice of your utility bill.
Yeah.
Um, Yet they've gone up 20% in 1 year. And they're probably going to go up again 20% next year. Um, and that's a little speculative because we don't know how much of that data center load is actually going to materialize. So that's itself a question mark. And how
Right.
accurately is the forward market predicting that? Um, but it does give you kind of an indication of where that supply and demand crunch is looking like right now. Um, I mean, these things just weren't planned for, and
Right.
so there's these questions of bring your own generation by data centers. I mean, you can't get it online fast enough. I mean, like gas turbines, that's at least 5 years out. The entire supply chain is already committed for gas turbines through 2030. So nobody can buy another one, much less build it until after 2030. The data centers can go up much quicker than that. Nuclear, that's 10 years out. So how do you get all this generation online? And then even assuming you can get the generation online, how do you build the wires to accommodate it? So there's almost definitely a supply crunch coming that's going to be in a big way, and power rates, yeah, I think they're going to go up
So
a lot,
investing
a lot
into
faster.
net metering for your own house would make sense at this point.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I did that a few years ago. So
Okay. I was never a fan
if
of
you've got the
solar.
program, if you've
My
got
my
the
dad
program,
ran, he was in nuclear power, so he was worked on the nuclear power plants for the Minnesota area. So I had always kind of just never really paid attention to solar because it wasn't reliable enough with the, not 24/7. But now that I'm seeing the AI come on, I'm like, we need everything we can get.
yeah, get if you've got a good net metering program, definitely take advantage of it. The thing to keep in mind is you've got this investment tax credit cliff coming up in June, where they have to begin construction by June. Otherwise, they're going to miss out on it unless they're able to complete construction by the end of 2027. That's another factor you gotta think about with all of this. So after that, the cost of solar is going to go up pretty significantly because that's 30% off the top right there. That's going away.
Okay.
Um, Good time to get it on your rooftop, but much harder to get, say, a megawatt down in that time frame if it's not already designed and developed.
Okay.
Um, so that's another pretty big hammer on the economic model.
Okay. Now, do you, in your travels, do you have investments that people can invest into, either from a passive investor or as an active investor? Do you do
You're just
syndications on power plants?
as like a lender financer you're talking about.
Yeah, it's more like a syndication. So you'd be a partner, silent partner on investment and get a cut of the returns.
I mean, professionally, no, that's not something that I do as an attorney. I mean, personally, no, I'm more of an equities guy. As I would probably tell you, I tend to do more in the stock market. That's more just because I'm in New Jersey and there's really not many opportunities for real estate out
Yeah.
here. Um, it's just not really something that I personally explored too much.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, look on the utility scale power plants. Yeah, they're all syndicated loans. So for sure, lenders. It's rarely a single lender. You usually have a syndicated administrative agent for the lenders that all pool together. Because it's rare that you'd find even from major national banks they're willing to put that much capital up for a single project.
Okay. And what are these size of the projects? 50 million plus?
Oh, way way more than that. I mean, we're
Way
talking
more?
a billion plus, yeah.
Oh, a billion. Okay, so you're talking the big nuclear reactors or the
Yeah,
big
or gas. I mean,
or gas power plants.
gas
Okay.
plants are a gigawatt plus a lot of the time. Yeah.
Okay. Got
I
it.
mean,
All right.
solar now is up to, we're getting to gigawatt solar plants. So yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah. Texas, Midwest, sure.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll open it up to questions. It wasn't the answers I wanted, but they're the actual answers that I needed to hear. So I appreciate that. And then I think everyone can unmute and just ask questions as they come up. So who is first in line?
I think, James, did you have a question about like geothermal?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a sense of is that a viable market at a perhaps a smaller scale?
I've actually heard quite a bit about geothermal lately, and I've mostly heard about it in the kind of southeast Texas area. I haven't done any geothermal projects, but I have heard there's been some pretty significant technological developments where they've brought down costs with it quite a bit. So yeah, potentially. And the thing about geothermal is again, like that's baseload power. So it produces 24/7. So it could potentially, provide, really good capacity factor, and that could make up for some of the higher costs too.
That's true, and you don't have to worry about the hailstorms in Texas.
Don't have to worry about the hailstorms in Texas. Yeah.
Rakesh, you had a question?
Hey folks, sorry, I'm driving. So, couple of questions. I'm based out of California. I heard there are some government programs that subsidize these solar plants. That is one question, and the other one is what about the nuclear reactors? I heard Texas, like some during COVID, some like families used to run nuclear reactors from their basement. So, is that a possibility as well?
Sorry, you broke up a little bit on the nuclear question. You heard about XL something?
Yes. So, is there any opportunity in the nuclear reactor space in terms of generating the energy?
Um, yeah, well, so I'll take the first part of the question on the government incentives. So at the federal level, you have the tax credits, and again, you've got some pretty tight deadlines coming up on that with the cliff for beginning of construction is as of June of this year, and then the alternative date is that you have to complete construction by the end of 2027 for your system to be eligible. But if you're not able to make those deadlines, the investment tax credit is presumably going away. That hasn't always been the case. You could always have some act of Congress that extends it. That's certainly been the case under previous administrations. Given that this is going to still be the current administration, I would not be optimistic of that happening this time because they've taken a pretty firm stance on that in Congress as well. So they had the opportunity to do that in the Senate bill. They did not. They did it for some other technologies like batteries did get extended, but solar did not. So I'm not personally very optimistic that that's going to be extended, and we're very much treating those deadlines as being drop dead deadlines for solar. At the state level, there's definitely incentive programs available. Community solar itself is what I would consider an incentive program because they've figured out a way to kind of rate structure so that it's more lucrative for solar projects because they fill kind of a social economic need for those projects. But there's other potentially state incentive programs that can be looked into, especially for smaller distribution scale systems. Sometimes they have state RFPs, competitive procurements, or they might have some other type of purchase of what's called the environmental attributes of projects, and so they're definitely worth looking into. Every state's different. Every state has different programs and different limitations on what types of projects they'll incentivize. So it's very important to get up to speed on whatever that local state is. So nuclear, whole lot of talk about nuclear. It's kind of the topic of the day, where it just came out of nowhere. Where all of a sudden we're all in for nuclear. My my honest opinion on nuclear is that it seems, in terms of the messaging on this, is that it's the one energy technology that neither political party can hate. But there's a lot of challenges with nuclear in terms of actual getting it in the ground. There's definitely a lot of headlines coming out about significant capital commitments that are being put towards nuclear, and you know, restarting like 3 Mile Island. That's definitely something that I found to be pretty shocking. Just how quickly that type of thing has come together in that thinking. So there's definitely a lot of thought being put into nuclear. They're working very hard to find the opportunities with it. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is coming out with updated regulations. I don't think they have yet, but I think they may be coming out in a couple of weeks. So there's a lot of movement in the nuclear space right now. But the practical matter of when did these things actually get built, and when we're talking about these large utility scale nukes that are the gigawatt plus, that's still probably 10 years out. I mean, that seems to be what I continue to hear from everybody, including, those in the nuclear space. That's not the only nukes that are on the table now. So we also have these small modular reactors that are kind of getting into their prototype stages. They have built them elsewhere outside of the U.S. They're making plans to start building those here. Those potentially have a shorter timeline. It's very unclear what that timeline is going to actually look like, as their estimates versus what it actually turned. But there's promise there, and I mean, I've even heard of companies that have like modular nukes where they're talking about like driving them around on cargo trucks, like that size nuke. I mean, look, we use them in military submarines. I guess why not? You could certainly fit it on a much smaller mobile transportation kind of modular device. So I've heard of companies that are looking into that as well. But um, this is all somewhat abstract and theoretical at this point, and it's very much in the planning phase because we still haven't actually started building these yet, and it's still expensive. So that's the other side. I mean, nuclear energy is still pretty expensive.
Hey, this is Steve. James and Craig, you made an interesting point about, kind of bringing this to a single family level to control future costs, and then kind of playing into what James said. James, were you talking about residential scale, like heat pumps, or were you talking like
Yeah,
like
residential.
aquifer, like a deep well down to hot rocks and like
No, just
okay.
residential, and not New York City style. Plug it into the granite and just draw heat from that. No more. I'm in Texas, so whatever I can do in my backyard.
Yeah, because I think those are both great points. It's if energy prices nationwide, is that kind of what I'm hearing, or are basically just going to keep climbing? Is that basically what you're saying?
I think that's a very realistic possibility. It will depend heavily on where the data centers wind up.
And how much community protest we get in these areas and that kind of stuff.
But I'd say it's mostly going to be where are they most strategic, right? I mean, Virginia right now is the hotbed for data center development, and that's because they have high capacity fiber optic networks there, and also population density. So those are two very important factors in terms of data center siting. Um, where else they go, they're looking all over the place. So it depends on which states are going to be more accommodating to them, like states that say impose that mandate of bring your own generation and basically say we're not going to do anything to incentivize you to come to our state. We're going to actually make it harder for you to come here. Well, they're probably going to look at other states. So there's a lot of factors that go into their decision making on just where they're going to actually build them. And then they also need the access to power. So they're also going to go to states where they may be able to build power more easily, be able to procure power at cheaper rates. that's going to be a very important factor too.
I
I think
understand they need the cheap power and the fiber optics. Why do they need a population density?
Well, they need data centers close to populations for actually performing the services close to them, right? So if you have a high demand in those population centers, they're going to need some of those data centers to serve that demand locally. Now, they will also have many data centers elsewhere that are doing a lot of that work remotely. But I understand, and look, data centers can be of many different sizes. So
Mhm.
I mean, right now in New Jersey, I know we only have data centers of like 50 megawatts or less. I think you're usually going to have kind of those smaller data centers that they can do on that they can have close to those urban population centers to service them. Um, and then you'd have the massive ones that do the bulk of the heavy lifting of calculations, AI work, and more kind of strategic remote places where they can get cheap power. It's cooler temperatures, but they still need fiber optic connections so that they can
Mhm.
actually get that data to where it needs to go.
Okay.
Yeah, bringing it back to applicability for this group. So I guess if you're a landlord and you're in a pad split scenario where you're providing utilities, for example, and splitting them across a pad split, maybe you took a 4-2 and turn it into a 6-3, right? Is that probably the most viable? And would geothermal be a better solution compared to solar, um, with the whole roof factor and all that viability?
I'm not sure that I followed your kind of hypothetical there. So when you say a 2-4 to a 6-3, can you give a little context to that?
Yeah, so there's a trend in real estate where some people on this call are switching to a co-living situation where they're taking like a 3-2 house and converting it into like a 5-3, 5-bed, 3-bath.
Oh, okay, got
And
it.
then they provide utilities, they provide a furnished room, a desk, a lamp, Wi-Fi, water, all that stuff, right? And so for an operator to control their costs, it sounds like the economics of potentially solar or geothermal heat pump, whatever it may be a way to control costs as an operator, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, definitely. But in that situation, I think your best bet is going to be talking to a couple of developers who does rooftop solar versus geothermal, get the numbers from them, and that way you can just do a clear comparison of what's going to cost you. Because I mean, at that scale, you're never going to be doing that like on your own. You're never going to be getting the equipment, installing it yourself, or anything like that. So you're going to have some third party doing the installation for you. It's going to be a retail installer. They're going to know the local programs and systems and all the economic incentives that they can get from the state, how they plug it in, and they do all of that is a very soup to nuts install, and so you can do a pretty clear comparison of costs.
Yeah, I assume that's where James is going with his question about geothermal. So that's why.
Okay, Nate, I got a question for you.
Yep.
Don't worry, I won't embarrass your friend. So since we're kind of running up on time, would you be willing to nerd out a little bit and tell us about your build out on your personal home? Because you've told me about it, and I
Yeah,
think it's fascinating.
totally. I have like a true Tesla home. So I have the Tesla solar roof, which is actually the solar shingles, not the panels. That comes at a premium, but I was like the fourth person in New Jersey to get it. I was probably the one of the first people in the first hour that was released that signed up for it. So I was kind of a test case prototype for their installer team to do it. So I got it at a pretty reasonable rate. I think they cost twice that now if you were to put in a deposit for one. Um, it's not as good as the panels. The panels are much more efficient. They have micro inverters. We have trees around, so trees give me shade cover, during the summer, during some of the late afternoon hours, which reduces my efficiency quite a bit. But even still, I mean, I offset pretty much 100% of my home energy usage. Um, and behind that, I have two power walls, which are the battery backups that Tesla offers. those power walls make it so that I can, go 24/7 without grid power if needed. If the power goes out, you have to have batteries integrated with your solar system in an outage situation in order to island, which means to continue to use your solar roof, because otherwise your solar roof will send electricity to the wires, and if they're working on the wires to make repairs, they can get electrocuted. So they don't allow you to use your solar roof unless you have batteries, which allows you to fully island your home system from the grid. Um, so that works out very well. The thing that I've never understood is why Tesla didn't open up their vehicles to charge vehicle to home charging, because I also have two Teslas. So if I could plug those two Teslas in, I could literally go a week without any power, um, and then just recharge it on the sun whenever it came up. But I could go a week without sun and just run off my batteries in my cars if I needed to. Um, I know the Ford Lightning lets you do that. I don't know if that interacts well with the Tesla system, but I know that they have their own kind of solution where you can plug that into your house. The problem is you have to have your truck at your house to use it. So if you take your truck out somewhere else, you don't have any power for your house unless you've got the solar and batteries on top of it. So I've had it now for, I think, 4 years, that whole setup. And I mean, power goes out by me a lot because I'm kind of at the top of the hill with a lot of trees and we get a lot of storms up here. And everybody in my neighborhood has a generator. And I don't even notice when the power goes off. I mean, I see a flicker of the lights and a little notification come up on my phone, and I just say, hey, I'm running off the power walls. Um, and, it's more than paid for itself already after 4 years. So doing pretty well in the payback period, too.
Okay, I've been reading a 7-year payback. Is that realistic, or are you seeing it faster with the 4 year? Or did
Depends
you
very
overdo
much.
it?
So it depends very much on where you are.
Okay.
So New Jersey has a very good program for solar residential customers where we get a nice, very sumptuous payout on the RECs, which is called the environmental attributes
Okay.
under the state program. My electric rates aren't that bad, so that's kind of a wash, but the payback period really I got from the RECs. Other states, it's going to depend more on your electric rates. So depending on how much you're paying for the solar versus your electric rates, is how quickly that payback period will be met.
Okay. And then when I was investigating this, do I can import out of China. I've got connections over there, but now we've got the tariffs there. What do I need for solar panels? Type N, is that the latest for um,
Oh, I'm
northern
not
Minnesota?
sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not really sure on the technical specifics of which panels.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's. I mean, I know that they kind of got these double-sided panels now that are more efficient in applications on, like, if you're not putting it directly on your rooftop. But yeah, I mean, how much you care about aesthetics versus just kind of what's the cheapest, most efficient one you can find is kind of another consideration. I mean, I personally think a lot of solar panels are hideous. So
Hmm.
I would be willing to pay a little bit more just to have kind of the more streamlined black panels with the window dressing on them. But,
Yep.
other people feel differently about that. But I think the cheap ones are just hideous.
Okay. Good to know. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks,
Nate,
Nathan.
oh,
Appreciate.
sorry, Nate,
Go ahead,
very, very
James.
quickly. What tech haven't we talked about tonight that you're interested in?
I mean, honestly, my favorite technology that I work with in the energy space is batteries. Um, I'm a total battery nerd, and batteries I think are going to totally transform our electric system. Um, they certainly are what enable renewables like solar. Like, you can't have solar and wind unless you've also got batteries on the grid eventually. But I think batteries, as they scale, they get more efficient, they get cheaper. Electric vehicles are not. As you're seeing more development in the battery technology space than anything. Like, we're moving into all these other areas of materials that they're making batteries out of for grid scale applications that just fly under the radar of the public press. But it's just accelerating at this remarkable pace, and it's going to transform the grid because it's going to totally change how we use the electric system. Um, it, it's like, it's like if you had fuel and gas lines and natural gas, but you didn't have any storage depots. Like right now, we have to produce every kilowatt of power that's used instantaneously to match demand because we have very little storage capability on the grid. Um, Once you have storage, how you produce and use electricity, the whole marketplace changes. And so I think that the battery topic is going to be the most fascinating from a policy perspective. I think that you're going to see enormous technological acceleration in the space. Um, and, you know, whether that's something that is an investment decision or not, but I will say for residential and small like home applications, batteries may ultimately be a significant economic tool because not only does it give you that backup capability for the house for power security, but there's also these new programs called virtual power plants that are rolling out. Texas was actually the first state that did it with these Tesla power walls that allow you to aggregate them together and bid them into the wholesale market because they're so valuable to the energy markets. So if you strung together all of these neighborhoods worth of batteries, if they had them, they can be a virtual power plant in their own regard, and they can kind of meet those shortfalls when demand peaks. Um, and you actually get paid back for that, and you get paid back for that at much higher rates because you're giving it to the system at the time when the electric rates are the highest. And when electric rates are highest in markets, they're higher by like 10x, sometimes 100x. Like Winter Storm Uri, power rates were like 1,000x. So you're getting paid back for that system at the peak market prices just for having it, basically. So I think that there's going to be much more economic opportunities for batteries that don't show up in the numbers now, um, but I think they'll become more and more valuable as time goes on.
I agree with you. I'm also thinking about what's a picks and shovels version of this, and the thing that comes into my mind is sounds really strange, fire suppression.
Mm,
So if you
yeah,
think about a domestic use case,
oh, totally.
but yeah, very interesting. Thanks for coming along and telling us.
That was a great question, James. Is that Nathan, is that viable now? I mean, could I take a warehouse and fill it with these batteries at this point and sell storage?
Um, so you could look. I mean, you can build a battery project. I mean, there's plenty of battery projects out there. Same kind of considerations as solar, right?
Hmm.
What size, scale, who's going to do it? How do you interconnect? How do you get an offtake for it? Or are you just going to do it in the wholesale market? I'd say the major distinction between just building a battery project versus the virtual power plant idea is that the battery in a home has its own service that it's providing. So you're already using it in the home as a backup generator. I mean, you spend what, 15,000 bucks on a natural gas generator for the
Hmm.
same purpose. It's just a backup generator. That's what your battery's doing. But you can actually sell that into the grid. And it happens automatically because they have software that does it for you. So you just get it for free. And you just get paid for that battery being used by the system. Um, when it's most vital for it. So that's really the key distinction between that. If you're just filling a warehouse with batteries, it's not really a virtual power plant. You're just building a battery project. So it's
Okay.
kind of the same development considerations of, okay, well, how big of a battery plant are you now building? Because if you're
Hmm.
talking about 100 kilowatts, well, okay, you're still in kind of the small distribution scale. You're going to need an aggregator to bid that into the market. They're going to have to manage it in the market. Um, it's probably too big for the actual virtual power plant programs. and you got to kind of navigate all those project economics the same way that you would your typical solar project. It's just with a battery.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to fit your world into the real estate investing world, and they're not quite jiving right now.
Yeah, I mean, think about it from a real estate investing world, like most, by far, most often as a landowner in the energy space, you're getting a lease from a developer. That's the vast majority of circumstances. Believe it or not, my battery project, they're the landowner. They're actually quarry operators. So, like, they're not, your traditional energy, but they talk to a lot of people who know what they're doing. Um, and so it's not totally untenable, but it's not the typical path. Usually landowners are passive in this and they have the land, the developer approaches them and they sign a lease.
Okay.
Um, if you wanted to be more active in the space, it's really something where you'd want to be partnering up or talking to experienced developers, um, because they know the permitting aspects that you have to get through, all the zoning issues, all of that stuff, the state programs, the wholesale markets, the interconnection with the utilities, that itself can be a pretty difficult thing to navigate. Like
Hmm.
utilities are not easy to work with when it comes to interconnection. So if you don't have the technical expertise, I mean, they will exploit that. Um, so it's very important that you have people that have a lot of experience in the industry to kind of navigate the project through.
Okay. Awesome. Any other questions before we close up here? All right. Well, thanks, Nathan. And then I do have